Welcome to FPTV and welcome to FPTV New Releases. Well, we are absolutely honoured to be joined by the author of Little Brother, the author of Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, and he's here with us to talk about his new novel, Attack Surface, which is set in the world of Little Brother. And joining me for this evening's session, we have the mighty Laura Dodd, Forbidden Planet's head book buyer. Cory, it's very nice to see you, mate. How are you?
It's lovely. I am as well as possible under the circumstances. I am solvent and not infected. And I think that's anything beyond that is just gravy. So, I'm fine. How about you?
Yeah, very similar, absolutely.
Good.
I'm not sure that being solvent and not infected is actually either Trump or Boris Johnson's plan for our societies, but
no, definitely not. No. I think we're headed towards universal employment under both, and it'll be like, if you don't want to starve to death, you can build the wall.
Correct.
Whether it's the wall with ire or the wall with Mexico, that's the workfare we're cruising towards. It's proper Claire Gordon territory now.
Yes, 1000%. Yeah. What a heartening way to start this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So mate, Attack Surface is due out next month. It's available. We've got a glorious book plate signed edition from you that is available for pre-order at the links attached to this interview. But what can you tell us about the new book?
Sure. So it is, as you say, a book set in the Little Brother universe. The first two books were young adult novels. This one is a standalone book, primarily aimed at adults, and not because of like bathing causey material, but because it's about moral reckonings. It's about people confronting the compromises they've made in their lives and realizing that one little compromise at a time, they have talked themselves into being monsters they don't recognize when they look in the mirror. And the protagonist is this woman, Masha, who appears at the beginning and the end of the other two books. And she spent her whole life as a surveillance contractor, first working for the Department of Homeland Security after a terrorist attack on her hometown in San Francisco, then hunting insurgents in Iraq as a Beltway bandit military contractor at a forward operations base, and then moving to the former Soviet Union and putting down democratic color revolutions on behalf of horrible dictators for enormous sums of money. And at each phase, she talks herself into thinking that she's one of the good guys. And she gets to a point where the things she's doing to assuage her conscience, like helping the rebels that she's hunting by day avoid her surveillance gear by night and teaching them what she's just installed and how to get around it, eventually that becomes untenable. She has to flee the country she's been living in, that she euphemistically calls Slovakia. She goes back to America, to San Francisco, and she realizes to her horror that her best friend, her childhood best friend, who's now a Black Lives Matter activist in Oakland, is being hunted with the same cyber weapons that she spent her career building. And she has to understand that the compartments that she's built did not shield her from culpability. They just accumulated a kind of moral debt. And, for all that, it's a techno thriller. It's a Little Brother novel. It's a book about skullduggery, about binary transparency and machine learning dazzle and self-driving cars that someone gets root on and turns into, mobile weapons platforms, and all of that other stuff that is presented with as much rigor and as much clarity as I can in this idea that was like the core conceit of the first Little Brother book and its sequel, Little Brother and Homeland, that the most important and interesting thing about computers is not imagining things they can't do and then using them as props. It's really leaning into what they can do and figuring out what stories fall out of that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I must say that's a very exciting description. And when Dodd and I were talking this afternoon, we were both talking about how much we're looking forward to this new book. I know that you're a big fan, Laura, so I know you've got a bunch of questions for Cory.
I do, yes. So you've also revisited this world, so in Homeland, Little Brother, and Attack Surface. How has the world kind of changed throughout the novels, and does it correspond with shifts in what's happening in the world today?
That is a really interesting question. So Little Brother is a novel I wrote in 2006 and that came out in 2008. And it's a novel about kind of cutting edge technological concepts that is now 12 years old, 14 years from the time I started writing it. So it is in some ways a very out-of-date novel, and yet it remains very relevant in a kind of objective sense that people continue to read it. It continues to appear in a bunch of curricula. It's taught at military academies and their insurgent warfare departments, and it's taught among radicals who are trying to figure out what to do with successor movements to Occupy. And the reason that it persists is that when you write a thriller around what technology can and can't do, where the tension arises from all-powerful states demanding that technologies do things that they shouldn't or can't do, or people trying to get technologies to do things that they're intrinsically able to do, that the problems that fall out of that are enduring, right? We tend to think of computers as being like really fast moving because, of course, you know, the pocket distraction rectangle that you play Angry Birds on is something that is a million times more powerful than the first personal computer I had in my parents' spare room in the early 80s. And then the pocket distraction rectangle you buy now that you play Fortnite on is thousands of times more powerful than that as well. But the underlying theory that all that stuff is built on, things like Turing completeness and the von Neumann architecture, things that were, you know, invented at Bletchley Park, that theory is very slow moving. The engineering goes fast, the theory goes slow, and the politics continues to refuse to grapple with the theory. And so the political dilemmas that we get into are just the same. They're just versions of the same stupid fights we were having 15 years ago with Tony Blair, when he was arguing that we should, you know, have that cryptography should work perfectly when you were trying to use it to defend yourself against criminals and identity thieves and stalkers, but it should also be somehow engineered to collapse immediately the instant the cops want to peer inside of it. And, you know, this idea of like selectively functional cryptography remains a stupid idea and continues to be front and center in many governments' agendas, including Boris's when he has 10 minutes to get around to it from all of the other things that he loses track of in his, you know, chaotic governing style. But the parts of the world that haven't changed at all is this idea that computers are what they are and that governments pretend that they're something else, and that this gets them into a lot of trouble. And the part that has changed is how important that is. Because, you know, 15 years ago, it was mostly allegorical if you said, well, you've got your body in a computer and a computer in your body, right? Your car is a computer and your home is a computer and so on. Today, that's absolutely true, right? You take the computers out of a car and it's like an inert lump of metal, right? People, this year, this calendar year, this short calendar year that we're living through, there have been people, for example, who use continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps to manage their diabetes, effectively artificial pancreases, who've had the software that they use to manage that taken away by the American medtech giant Abbott Labs on a copyright claim, where your internal organs are suddenly subservient to the copyright desires of a distant Silicon Valley medtech grifter, right? So, you know, the importance of being terribly wrong about computers is much higher now, but the wrongness isn't any higher. We're still as stupid and wrong about it as we were. And if anything, that's just like a depressing fact of life, you know.
What one of many that you touched upon tangentially during that response. Wow, Laura, you were telling me earlier on about the Kickstarter that Cory has. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I found this fascinating. It was the one for the audio, I believe.
Sure, me or Laura?
Oh yeah, no, sorry,
yeah,
I was reminiscing there. So that was a supremely poorly expressed question, wasn't it? Laura, can you tell me about this thing that Cory's doing?
I would love to hear Laura describe it, but if you'd like, I can have a go. So I won't let any of my electronic works be sold with what's called DRM, or digital rights management. That's the thing that locks your ebooks to a Kindle or your audiobooks to Audible. And it's also the thing that, you know, stops you buying a DVD overseas and playing it on your DVD player, or installing a third-party app store for your iPhone. And I think it's just a fundamentally illegitimate kind of technology. I don't think computers should boss around their owners. I think anyone who's ever read science fiction understands intuitively why owners should be able to override computers and not the other way around. I mean, I can't let you do that, Dave, was not a suggestion. And the problem is that we live in an era of massive, horrific monopolies, right? Where we have like 5 publishers, 4 movie studios, 3 record labels, 2 beer companies, and 1 eyewear company, like, left in the world of any size. And we have 1 major electronic book retailer, Amazon, which is also, if anything, even more dominant in audiobooks through its Audible division, where it has more than 90% of the market. And Amazon has a policy that they won't sell your books unless you put DRM on them, which is to say, unless you lock those books in all perpetuity to Amazon's platform, which is like so obviously a bad idea that I'm just like, I'm sorry, it's a non-starter. And my publishers, to their credit, are very sympathetic to this point of view. They have their own love-hate relationship with Amazon, but they're like, look, if you're not going to allow us to sell your audiobook in the place where 90% of the market is, we're not going to pay you for your audio rights. And, fair enough, right? So I kept my audiobook rights. I live here in Los Angeles. I moved here from London 5 years ago. Within a few minutes walk, I can get to one of the greatest recording studios for audiobooks in the world, Skyboat Media. A few minutes walk in the other direction is one of the great narrators, my friend Amber Benson, who used to be Tara on Buffy, and also, as you'll know, as booksellers, is a wonderful novelist herself. And I contracted with Amber to work with Skyboat and to record the audiobook of Attack Surface. We got my longtime sound editor, John Taylor Williams, who's been doing my podcast for more than a decade, to do the mastering. And we're pre-selling it on Amazon, not on Amazon, on Kickstarter rather, to prove that you can have a success without going through Amazon. So it's halfway through the campaign now. We've just crossed $226,000 worth of pre-orders for it and the ebooks, and orders for the backlist as well. I'm selling the ebooks on behalf of my publishers, so I keep the 30% that Amazon would normally keep, give them back the 70% that Amazon would normally remit to them, then they take 25% of what's left and give it back to me as my royalty. So I get about 50%, 47.5%. But with the audiobook, it's all mine. I keep 100% of it. And my hope is that if I can show my publisher that you can make not just good money, but a hell of a lot of money selling audiobooks to a hell of a lot of people without Amazon, that they'll consider buying my next round of audio rights. I'm negotiating a new book deal with them right now. And that in the wake of that, they'll help me do a campaign like this next time. And that if other best-selling authors see this and go, look, I actually have a big enough audience through social media, mailing lists, and so on, I can reach all of the people who might want to buy this and convince them to get it on Kickstarter, where it should be noted, Kickstarter's take is 5%, not 30%. I can make a lot more money. And then maybe what we end up with is a world where instead of having Audible exclusives, where the best-selling books are increasingly only available if you buy an Audible subscription, we can have exclusives of Audible. A world where the best-selling novelists make more money by not selling on Audible. And maybe that's what brings Audible to the table, being the only marketplace where you can't get the bestsellers. And maybe that will make them adopt more equitable terms towards us writers.
Well said. Wow. I think that's very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder whether that's probably a reason that a lot of authors go self-published, even if they've already had some books with traditional publishing, just to kind of have the rights themselves and kind of earn a fair wage for.
Yeah, there's certainly something to it. I mean, I feel like I get a good deal from my publisher for what they take out of what they sell. I feel like they offer me a lot of value. I just don't know that that's as true of Amazon, right? I think that, I'm a recovering bookseller. You can see, right? I worked in a specialist science fiction store, Baca Books in Toronto, the oldest science fiction store in the world. I worked in an academic store. I worked in a mall store. And booksellers do add a lot of value. But I would have never maintained the pretense that my selling the book was more important than someone else writing it. And that my preferences as to the terms on which the books be sold should trump the preferences of either the person who wrote the book or the company that invested in the publication of the book. And I think that the traditional bookseller, publisher, writer arrangement, it has its moments where it's not great, but I think by and large, it's a pretty good arrangement. And I think what's happened is that the growth of monopolies in all three domains has been toxic to, first of all, everyone who's not a monopolist, right? Like, this is what monopolies do, is they squeeze their suppliers. And as you know, you hear when you hear how farmers who have to sell into Tesco's live and so on, or workers who work in Tesco's live, right? That the squeezing the supplier is the easiest thing to do when you have a bottleneck where you control a market. And that the other thing that monopolists do is they eventually start to fight with each other to the great detriment of everyone else. You may remember that Amazon and Macmillan and then Amazon and Hachette had a dispute, and Amazon just took all their books out of the store. And these are not small presses, right? These are giant multinational corporations. And, you know, we can say, oh, well, Amazon is so big that they can beat up, you know, the titan of the tech industry can beat up the titan of the book industry. But this is not, you know, ancient Irish lore. It's not the Scottish giant versus the Irish giant, you know, lobbing rocks at each other across the Irish Sea, right? Like, this is meant to be a pluralistic world where instead of having to hope that some champion acts on your behalf, that you can just exercise self-determination, right? That people in markets and in the world can make these calls for themselves rather than having to hope that they get forbearance from an all-powerful titan.
It does prove very tricky, I know, from my point of view, kind of having to try and kind of price match Amazon sometimes, and obviously that they can do free delivery and things like that. So you want to kind of give people these amazing books, but then you're also aware that you're being undercut.
Oh, and you know, let us not forget the many years in which Amazon maintained the pretense that, like, all of its sales were concluded in, like, international airspace somewhere over Luxembourg and not liable to VAT. You know,
right.
it's a nice work if you can compete with someone by selling their products for 20% less because you don't have to collect the tax.
Yeah, well said. Cory, what can you tell us about your attack surface lectures?
Yeah, these are really fun, and we're going to be doing some UK ones as well. They just haven't been announced by Head of Zeus yet, but you know, obviously you can't tour during a plague the way you can during the normal times, the great before. So, you know, with Walkaway, I was in 35 cities in 45 days. I was all over the UK, all over the US and Canada. And then, you know, a year later, I was all over Australia and New Zealand. And that's clearly not going to happen this time around. So writers have been trying to work out what to do about this. They've been doing these events often in concert with bookstores where they and the bookseller maybe invite a guest on, and they do like a variety hour, like a Zoom call. And they tend not to do very many of those because they're all the same, right? So, like, nobody wants to go to two of them. You can all, like, it's not like trying to squeeze everyone into, like, Forbidden Planet or the basement of the Waterstones and Tottenham Court Road or whatever. You know, you have like an infinitely large Zoom room that as many people as want can attend, and you know, the bookseller can fulfill the orders the next day. And I wanted to do something that was more beneficial to more booksellers, because one of the things about going around on the road and being so well looked after by so many booksellers is you develop a great affection for them. And I wanted to do something that would explore all the different themes that the book touched on. And so, working with Tor, my publisher in the US, we booked 8 nights of lectures with each on a different theme, from post-cyberpunk to personal security in the digital age to intersectionalism, race, and surveillance, that touches on the different themes from the book. And the guests and I will appear courtesy of a different bookstore every night, all across the US. And those booksellers and I are going to fulfill the orders. So I do have this big wad of book plates. Where have they got to? Oh, here they are. This big wad of book plates from Tor. There's a couple thousand of these that I'm going to send to the booksellers. But for about half of the booksellers, they've opted to make me their fulfillment agent. So my publisher is about to fill my entire office with boxes of my own book and prepaid postal envelopes. And I am going to sign, inscribe, and personalize books for everyone who attends each night's event. and post them to them from my local post office, which was my idea. Nobody twisted my arm to make me do it, but I want to make it worth the while of the reader, and I want to make it worth the while of the bookseller, and I want to help booksellers get through a really tough time. And so this felt to me like the best way to make that connection. I mean, there's one thing I've learned from these months of doing these books, and this is, I have to say, this is the 4th book I'm publishing in 2020. I've had terrible timing. I did, we had Posey the Monster Slayer, this picture book.
Yeah, right on.
And then in the US and Canada, we had the omnibus edition of Little Brother and Homeland with an introduction by Edward Snowden, and then I just published an online book called How to Destroy Surveillance Capitalism with 1 0, and I have this one as well. And one of the things I've learned in just making really direct personal appeals to people as a writer, trying to make these things that took all these years to write have a life in the world during the plague, is that people are really personally invested in this, that this is about writers, readers, and booksellers caring about one another and doing caring work for one another, telling their friends, attending events, making personal connections, talking to each other on social media. And, it's of course it's a personal thing, right? It's always anyone who's ever been to a signing knows that there's a personal thing. I mentioned Amber Benson before. One of the most important lessons I ever had about signing books was one time we did a group signing at Dark Delicacies, our local science fiction and horror store, me and her and another writer. And we all had like a group of maybe 20 people in a queue. And the block was very long. Dark Delicacies likes to do these 3-hour afternoon drop-ins. So we're all just sat there, and I'm like, me and the other guy got through our 20 people in 15 minutes. Because my attitude until then had always been, it's so unfair to the person at the back of the line to dawdle, right? Amber, on the other hand, and I think this is a TV star thing, made a real meal out of every interaction and really took time to talk to people. And not only did she clearly have a better time than I was, but the people waiting in the line were not upset in the slightest, because what they saw was that they were waiting to have a personal connection, right? To like, because they were moved by some art you made and they wanted to talk to you about it. And that was like really actually transformative to the way I look at these things. I realized that the signed book is a personal connection with the author. That it passed through their hands, but mostly it's a souvenir. I think when you go to a signing, it's a souvenir of a moment that you shared with someone whose work mattered something to you. And I've been so forcibly reminded of it as I've been doing the Kickstarter publicity and talking to people about the tour as it's been coming up. Writing is not a solitary occupation. Writing, for all that we spend a lot of time holed up in little caves, making up imaginary stories with our imaginary friends in them, the business of being a writer is an intensely sociable activity.
I think that's true, and it very much, reflects the origins of the writing trade, where it comes from, where storytelling comes from. And I think to mirror the emotional investment that your fans and your readers have through such clearly defined actions, not just the moments when you get to speak to them, but the fact that you're taking all of this effort and that, you're demonstrably working hard to deliver something for them and caretaking for them and posting it yourself. I think that's a really quite unusual thing and a very laudable thing that really means something, actually, particularly now. I mean, it must feel great for you to do that, but for your fans and readers, I think it's awesome.
It is a lot of work, and it's hard to be Cory the writer and Cory the person who is a writer in the world. I've got a book I'm working on, and so like I'm trying to do that and trying to promote this book and whatever. But it's also, as you say, very rewarding. It feels really good, and it feels like I am part of a community of people who are all trying to figure out what to do about this very difficult, very terrible moment that we're in. I mean, our finances have picked up mostly because of the Kickstarter, but there was a time not long ago, 6 weeks ago even, where we were really worried about our finances, like refinancing the mortgage, worried about our finances. And I had a sense all along that if it really ever came to it, that people who cared about my work would figure out how to help me muddle through, that I could go to them and ask them. I still feel that way. And I feel that way in part because sometimes I get asked by the people who I care about, and I see what happens. I see how I feel about it, right? When I get asked by people I care about, whose work I care about, and they say, look, I'm you know, things are tough and I'm making an appeal to you, my readers or my fans, can you help me out? And I never feel like I'm being put upon. I always feel like that's part of the two-way street between the creator and the audience. But it also makes me understand that, like, we are in community, the community of readers and writers, people who care about the destiny of the world, people who care about the digital freedom and the destiny of our computers, and that we got each other's backs.
Yeah, well said, mate. I think that's absolutely right. We're racing full throttle towards the end of our interview, so got time for one more question from Laura, and I know you've got a bunch, Laura, so it's time to pick wisely.
You had a shout out in Ready Player One for being the president of the Oasis.
That was great. Yeah.
It was very funny the first time I noticed it. Yeah, I was very amused by it. I would be a terrible president, right? I mean, I think the thing that we're really learning, if we didn't know it already, is that people who are like good at gabbing and maybe like good at, you know, rousing rabble and whatever, that's an important part of our politics. But to be a leader is largely an administrative task requiring sustained attention and, you know, focused attention. And like, I won't say I'm as bad as Boris, but I have been known to go off and chase
no one is as bad as Boris, apart
no, it's true. It's true. Or
Trump
or whatever. You know, I'm definitely capable of paying more attention than them. But, you know, I work with lawyers as an activist. And the lawyers I work with, you know, they embody the virtue of being able to pay sustained attention, particularly to boring things, because that's where you hide the bodies, right? Is in the fine print. And I understand that I do not have the right stuff to be president of the internet. I don't have the right stuff to be president of a lemonade stand. So nor do I think the internet should have a president, as a secondary matter. But also, yeah, I don't think that but it was very nice of Ernie. That was super nice of him to do.
It must have been fantastic. Having said that though, mate, having, you know, listened to you talk, and you talk very well, but listen to the content of your thought for the last half an hour or so, I think you might be doing yourself a grave disservice. And that whole point reminded me of, I don't know if you heard it, there was a recent episode of Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History, which is literally all about this, the dichotomy between the people who speak well publicly that we elect and the people who actually think in depth and get things done to a high degree of professionalism, and how that chasm is widening. But, you know, I feel that you were well chosen as in Ready Player One.
Well, that's very nice of you. Thank you very much. You know, when I became a British citizen, we went to Hackney Town Hall, and the Speaker of Hackney Council came out in her ermine robe,
regalia,
wig, the gloves, the mace. She kind of looked out at us and said, you know, today you become citizens of a democracy, and you should be involved in our civics. Become a governor of your child's school, become a local counselor, join the planning committee, do something that is, you know, because now you have the freedom as a British citizen to be involved in our democratic institutions. And afterwards I shook her hand and I thanked her for awakening me from my long Canadian totalitarian nightmare.
Amen. And on that note, this has been FPTV New Releases, and you have been watching the mighty Laura Dodd and Cory Doctorow talking about his latest novel, Attack Surface, which you can order from us here at Forbidden Planet. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
It's very
Thank
mutual.
you so much.